This is Booked on Rock. I'm Eric Senich. Our guest, Michael Christopher, author of Van Halen, The Eruption, and The Aftershock. Come the late 70s, the rock music landscape was littered with the bloated carcasses of bands who partied too hard, burned out, or became complacent in success. The door was open for something fresh, wild, and enrapturing. Enter Van Halen. Made up of two Dutch-born brothers, one on drums, and the other whose guitar was an extension of his very being, a bass player with a golden throat, and a frontman who made up for his lack of traditional singing ability with attitude and gravity-defying acrobatics on stage. They were unlike anything ever seen before. Alex and Edward Van Halen, Michael Anthony, and David Lee Roth put a cap on one decade and exploded into the next with a brand of music not quite punk, not quite metal, and not at all subtle. They went from headlining backyard keggers to top billing at the US Festival in front of 300,000 people within 5 years. Then, right when it looked like there wasn't an obstacle created to slow the Mighty Van Halen ascent, the group imploded from the inside out, only to rebound stronger than ever with ex-Montrose howler Sammy Hagar, leading them to 4 consecutive #1 albums. Van Halen, The Eruption and The Aftershock tells the story of how one of America's greatest bands weathered arguably the most dramatic soap opera in rock and roll history, with songs that would weave themselves into the fabric of every musician who heard them, alongside an incendiary and unrivaled live show. Featuring exclusive interviews with insiders, fans, and artists who were there to witness the rise, the tumult, and the making of legends, it's a story that has to be read to be believed. Michael Christopher is a journalist and music historian. He's the author of Depeche Mode, All That's Left to Know About the World's Finest Synth-Pop Band, a senior writer for the online music magazine Vanyaland, where he was a founding member and later managing editor. He contributes regularly to Ultimate Classic Rock, Loudwire, and LA Weekly. He also has a music and lifestyle column in the Daily Times, a newspaper in the Philadelphia metro region. His work has appeared in the Boston Phoenix, Boston Magazine, Rockpile, and Diffuser. He lives in Boston, building a respectable vinyl collection. To hear a playlist of the music discussed in this episode, just head over to the show notes page. This interview is also in conjunction with the Van Halen News Desk, which you can find online at vhnd.com, and the Van Halen Store, where you can now get your copy of Michael's book Van Halen, The Eruption and The Aftershock at vanhalenstore.com. Michael, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. I'm super excited to be here.
It's great to talk to a fellow Van Halen fan, and for me, it was hearing 5150 on Christmas Eve of 1988. That's the one that lit me up. That's when I became a fan. You describe your moment as life-altering in your book. That is when you first heard Women and Children First. Can you take us back to that moment? It was on vinyl, too, which is cool.
It was on vinyl, yeah. I was just a little kid, and I was raised by my grandparents, and my youngest uncle, who's only about seven years older than me, he had brought home, not on the day of its release, it wasn't right then, but I was still a really little kid, and he just dropped the needle on that. And when you hear something like Everybody Wants Some, and just the drum beats, it catches your little childlike attention. Like, what the heck is that? And then you hear that searing guitar and Dave's wild man screams, and I was just hooked instantly. And then going to do other stuff like Fair Warning and eventually back to the first album and the second record, it just roped me right in. Of course, once I start getting an allowance or being able to use my own money, that was some of the first stuff that I bought. But I to this day, I think I was one of the only kids in grade school that had a Van Halen t-shirt I was probably in second or third grade, and it was one of those iron-ons that you get at a local store and put on a t-shirt, and it was a little collage of the band. So once I was in, I was fully invested in this band.
Yeah, there's nothing like that very first time you hear one of their albums, too. You can't go back and redo that. You can only experience it once.
Right. And the first one that I had the actual experience with of hearing it front to back on my own was 1984. When that came out, and just hearing that opening song, hearing the title track, was like, what is this? And then, of course, Jump kicks in, and that had already been released as a single, so I knew that. But the rest of the record was just nonstop. I mean, it just blew my mind.
Magical feeling. And you wrote a great article recently for Ultimate Classic Rock on the band's 1996 song Me Wise Magic, which was one of the two new songs the band recorded with David Lee Roth for the Best of Volume 1 album. You actually named your cat after the song. Your mother teased you, saying there's something seriously wrong with you. So if it makes you feel any better, a few years ago, had a fish, and I named him Halen. So either you're not crazy or we are both crazy. But
no, I think we're both pretty nuts.
Yeah.
But it's a good nuts. You know?
You're not alone.
There could be worse things to be into, and there's definitely worse bands to be into, although not for the drama factor. But it's not like we're apologies to all the Dave Matthews Band fans out there, but it's not like we're listening to Dave Matthews nonstop and torturing people with that.
Well, the book is heartfelt. You write that it was your way of dealing with the grief of Eddie's passing last year. So was that the inspiration?
Yeah, I think that the impetus behind it was for a couple of different reasons, and that was one of them. I mean, I wanted to tell the story of Van Halen now that it has that end point, which unfortunately it reached that end point last October. And, we're never going to be able to see them in concert again. We're never going to be able to wait for that new record of new material. Hopefully we get some archival stuff, but having that end point made for a good way to well-round the story of Van Halen. But also, it did help me deal with the grief of losing Eddie. I mean, that's really the only way you can put it. And I remember that I had editors. I have a weekly column in Philadelphia in a newspaper down there, and my editor was like, "All right, are we going to do Van Halen something every week?" And when is this? And he was kind of joking around about it, but I realized I'm not going to be able to stop writing about Van Halen. Now, thankfully, I get to do those retrospective articles for places like Ultimate Classic Rock, but I wanted to keep talking about the story and tell the story and make people aware of just what made Van Halen so special, as opposed to some of the other bands out there that just don't capture you the way that they did. People forget. They have really short memories. And this is the mainstream. Of course, there's people like us out there and the hardcore Van Halen fans, but other people move along. If there's not a David Lee Roth tour, if there's not a Sammy Hagar tour, if there's not a new Van Halen record, they move on to other bands. And that just becomes a legacy act that, oh, yeah, I heard that song on the radio the other day. It made me, I heard Panama. Now I'm listening to 1984. Or I heard something. I heard Cabo Wabo. Why Can't This Be Love? And now I'm listening to it again. But it's always in the forefront of my mind. That band's always one of the forefronts in my life.
Yeah, I'd like to see what happened with Queen happen with Van Halen, to see what Brian May and Roger Taylor have done to continue the legacy. Whether you like the movie or not, or you like all of the decisions they've made it their priority to make sure that Freddie Mercury has not been forgotten and the band Queen has not been forgotten. And there are a lot of kids out there who are Queen fans that weren't even alive when this band was around. I'd like to see that happen with Van Halen. Unfortunately, you do have the Sammy versus Dave thing. That gets in the way. It's different than AC/DC with Bon Scott and Brian Johnson, where Brian Johnson had the ultimate respect for his predecessor. It's that kind of gets in the way of the legacy. So you're either... I hate that people have to choose a side. You shouldn't have to.
You really shouldn't. And there's a big part of the book where I interviewed a bunch of different fans about why they're so passionate about one and not the other. And these are people that don't like the other version and just so passionate about it. And some of it was so boggling to me because I love both eras. I mean, if I was being burned at a stake and had to pick one, I'd probably pick Dave, go with the original lineup. But I love Sammy stuff. I love a lot of what Gary did on Van Halen 3. And I'm not completely with blinders on, where I think that, Up for Breakfast is one of their better songs, or that, some of the stuff on 3 is their greatest stuff. But there's so much to be celebrated in both eras of that band. And a big part of it, if not the biggest part of it, is Eddie's guitar playing. And that's why it's always been about Eddie. That's why on the book cover, it's Eddie's photo is the one that's in color that pops. I mean, that's the one I wanted to do. I wanted to make that the main feature of the cover, and the rest of the guys in black and white. Not to diminish what they brought to the band, but Eddie is the reason why the guitar was revolutionized. I mean, that's the reason why Van Halen sounded so different than a bunch of other bands that came up in the 80s. They didn't have that soul that Eddie did in his playing, you know?
And the cover has a picture of everyone who's been in the band from day one, including Wolfgang, including Gary Cherone. So let's go through, because that's what this book does, goes through the history of Van Halen, starting with the beginning. So let's go back to that winter of 1978 when Van Halen's debut album is released. It's really a perfect record from start to finish, and one of the tracks is Eruption, the groundbreaking instrumental that left everybody, their jaws dropped when they heard it for the first time, including Ted Templeman, who produced that album, produced the first 6 classic Van Halen albums. And you write about the 2 amazing foundations of note regarding Eruption, how it ended up on the record, and how Eddie felt about it being indicative of his perfectionism. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Ted Templeman just heard him noodling away on his guitar, and it was basically a warm-up exercise that Eddie was doing, and also something he incorporated into his solo spots around that time in the shows before the debut record came out. And Ted was like, we got to capture this on tape. And of course, Don Landy, the engineer, said, I've already got the tape rolling. But Eddie, to his dying day, said that he could have done it better, that he messed up a part at the very beginning of it, which is unbelievable. I mean, it is a legitimate masterpiece of music. And to know that, that's like saying, I wish that the Mona Lisa looked a little bit better, but it just kind of doesn't. It's perfect to anyone that hears it.
Have you ever had the chance to ask guitarists? I've asked a few of the hardcore guitarists out there about it, and the ones that I've asked say they don't pick up any mistakes. Have you ever come across anybody who has picked up on it? No,
and it's funny because one of the people that I asked that was Joe Satriani, and this was several years ago, and he said no, it seems flawless to me, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, but it's like I don't hear any mistake there.
He said it was in the beginning. Eddie said that, right? Somewhere in the beginning.
It was in the beginning. Yeah. I don't get it. I don't hear it. And I don't know note for note music and how all of that works. But to me, it just blows my mind. I don't hear a thing like Led Zeppelin. They have some crazy errors in their music. And one of the things that jumps to mind is on their song, Since I've Been Loving You, John Bonham had this really loud squeak on his kick drum. And Jimmy Page has said that when he listens to it to this day, that squeak gets louder and louder and louder. And now when I hear it, it gets louder and louder and louder. But there's nothing like that on Eruption.
It's that quick lay it down on tape and move on approach. It's interesting in that many artists, not just Van Halen, they want to go over a track over and over again. And as a result, we may never hear that music, or if we do, it's a long time between albums, and it may not be as good as if it were just what was put on tape in those first few takes. And it seems as if Ted Templeman was aware of that, and that fast in and out approach, it paid off. The David Lee Roth era, especially those first few records, they're raw, but they're perfectly imperfect.
Yeah, if it's a warts and all thing, and the longest thing that took to record across their entire career with David Lee Roth was David Lee Roth's vocals. And even that was just done with that whole mistakes and all approach. And you have to thank Ted Templeman for that, because when it sounds too polished, you lose some of that magic. I think that for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, that's a little bit too polished for my taste, but not so much that I don't listen to it. I don't go back and check it out. It's just the fact that it took so long to record that record. Maybe the same with those 3 songs that they did on the best of with Best of Both Worlds with Sammy Hagar. Just a little too slick for me. But I like the rawness of those early recordings.
And you devote a chapter to the stories behind each of the original members: David Lee Roth, Eddie Van Halen, Alex Van Halen, and Michael Anthony. A lot has been documented on those 4 guys, but there is a name that the non-Van Halen diehards may not know about, and that is Mark Stone.
Yeah, Mark Stone, who was the original bassist for Van Halen, for Mammoth, and Genesis, as they were called Genesis for a little bit of time. And he really has become this sort of forgotten footnote in the history of Van Halen, which is such a shame. I mean, one of the things I even noted in the book is in David Lee Roth's 1997 memoir, Crazy from the Heat, he calls him Mike Stone. And for the guy in your own band not to even remember your full name, it's kind of insulting in a way. And I know that Eddie had stayed in contact with him through his whole life, and I'm not sure if Alex did or did not. But yeah, Mark Stone was kind of an unsung hero, but he's an integral character in the story of Van Halen.
He sadly passed away recently, and Wolfgang, he had some kind words to say about Mark Stone when he passed away, which I think may have been, was it shortly before Eddie passed? It might have been days or weeks before.
It was right around that time, because I know that Wolfgang had said that he met him a few times, but yeah, I'm not sure exactly when he passed, but I feel like it was maybe August of 2020.
I'm going to look it up here and see if we can find it. Yeah, here we go. September 26, 2020. That is literally less than 2 weeks?
Less than 2 weeks away, yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the Van Halen logo, one of the greatest band logos in rock history. The truth behind its origins is somewhat complicated, as you write.
Yeah, it's really murky, isn't it? Because and Noel Monk was the one that first brought this to people's consciousness when he said he was the manager of Van Halen from, I guess, the second record on. And he discovered when he was going through the files of their original manager, Marshall Burrell, he discovered this poster of Jimi Hendrix, and it had that logo, that winged logo with the sharp angles on it, but instead of being a VH, it was a JH. And he thought, wow, they stole that logo, and it looks just like the Van Halen 2 logo. And I dug pretty deep into that to find out if that really was from Jimi Hendrix, or if it was from whoever the artist was that made that logo. And what I discovered was, I think that it was just somebody who was designing that was given a little bit of either wink and a nod to Van Halen and using Hendrix's logo, or that making a new Hendrix logo based off of that. Because that box set that appeared in, the Hendrix one, didn't come out until 1980. And it was only released in Germany at first. Of course, now you can get it anywhere. But I think it was released in Germany, and after that, Australia. And it was just a poster that was included. It's got a picture of Jimi Hendrix, and it's got the logo. But I really don't think that that's where Van Halen got it. I think that was somebody taking a dig at Van Halen. I did try to talk with the original designer of the Van Halen logo, Dave Bang, who did both the first and the second Van Halen album logos, and he didn't want to talk about it. He just said, I don't want to talk about the origins of that. And it sounds more mysterious than I think it really is. I've got a feeling that he's going to do some sort of book and talk about his history as being a graphic artist in rock and roll. And he knows that a lot of people are going to want to know exactly how he came up with that. And he might have wanted to save it for his own book.
To be continued. People can see the picture of the Hendrix logo in your book, The Eruption and the Aftershock, which is out right now. So if people want to see it, you do have that picture of Jimi Hendrix just above it, and then you see that logo, man, and it is strikingly similar to the Van Halen logo.
It's wild. It's wild how much it looks like it. I've even seen some images of backstage passes and just some other spots where it looks so much like that. It's a lot more narrow than the one is on Van Halen 2, but I've seen just how close that Van Halen one is to it. I would have loved to have got, and I really dug deep. I mean, I dug deep for the whole book, but I really tried to find out who was responsible for coming up with that Hendrix poster in that box set. And it went as far as trying to reach out to all these old contacts of Parlophone Records in Germany, and just had no luck with where that poster came from, because it's not something that you see every day. It's not the cover of, Are You Experienced or Band of Gypsies. It's this weird poster that was thrown into a box set, and that's the only way you could get it. It doesn't appear in any other Jimi Hendrix book or archival material. It's just in that one weird 10 LP box set.
And that's in 1980.
1980 was when that was released.
So
and of course, you had Van Halen 2 came out in 79, and that's what it looks like. It looks like the Van Halen 2 logo. Time-wise, the Van Halen 2 came out first, but Did somebody from Warner Brothers have that earlier? Did they pass it along to the designer and say, look what we got? This might work for Van Halen. I don't know. I hope that one day we do find out. I mean, I hope that one day Dave Bang puts out a book and says, I've heard all these crazy rumors. I heard what Noel Monk said. I've seen these other speculation things, but it was all created by me, and that's it. But until then, it's one of the many mysteries surrounding Van Halen.
And eventually, producer Ted Templeman sees Van Halen performing on just a random weeknight at the Starwood Club on the Sunset Strip. This is in February of 1977. He was big time. He produced the Doobie Brothers, Little Feat, Van Morrison, and Montrose, featuring a then unknown singer named Sammy Hagar. And it's really from his experience with Montrose that Ted knows the importance of having a hit single. Montrose did not have a hit single from their debut album, and as a result, didn't become the smash success Ted thought it would be. This leads Ted to decide, let's choose a specific track from this first album that's going to be perfect for radio. And so he decides, You Really Got Me. And they record You Really Got Me really specifically because that's his intent. He knew radio stations would be more likely to play it since it was already a hit song from the Kinks. But he also had to rush the single to radio since there was another band who recorded a version of it.
There was a band called Angel on Casablanca Records. They were promoted as sort of the anti-Kiss, whereas Kiss had their black and white grease paint makeup and dressed in primarily all black and a little bit of silver and white. Angel was clad in all white. I mean, they looked like a group of, the guy from Colonel Sanders, the Kentucky Fried Chicken guy. It was just a bunch of people in all white. And one of them, one of the members of the band was hanging out with Edward Van Halen, and Eddie had played him some of the new material that was going to be on their debut. And he heard You Really Got Me. And he went back and told their manager or their whoever and said, why don't you guys record it? Why don't you guys record You Really Got Me? They killed that song. They put a different spin on it. And this was a time before you had covers that not only were done, but done so differently than the original, where the band had put their original stamp on it. You would have stuff like I know Zeppelin was doing a lot of covers of old blues songs, but this is something that was really recent in the Kinks song, which came out in, I believe it was 64 or something when it first came out. It was getting a lot of play on the radio. It was getting played on rock radio. And to do a new rendition of that immediately grabs you. So Angel goes back and they record it, and Casablanca's going to rush release that. And Ted Templeman gets the news. He calls up Eddie and says, the hell? Did you play that for anybody? He goes, yeah, I played it for a lot of people. He goes, well, now Angel's going to release it, and they're going to beat us to the punch. We want this to be our first single because it's already a proven song. It's a proven single, and it's going to blow people away when they hear your guitar playing on it. And now, what are we going to do? So they had to rush release it. They had to rush release the single of You Really Got Me, use the old Van Halen logo, which looked what Eddie called the more punk rock in design, looked like they were trying to make them the Clash, is what he would later say. And that went out to radio and retailers just so it could be Angels to the mix.
What if Angel gets to it first? Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference. Maybe it would have. But the bigger what if is, what if Sammy Hagar was on that first album? Let's explore that thought some more here, because early on, Ted Templeman had his struggles with David Lee's vocals, and there was even the thought of bringing in Sammy Hagar back then. Of course, Ted worked with Sammy for the Montrose record, but Ted decided against it. Why did he decide against it?
He knew that there was some magic in David Lee Roth, and where it might not be in his vocals, it was in his delivery. It was the way that he had a way with lyrics. And he also didn't want to disrupt the band dynamics. However dysfunctional they could be at times, he knew that he was basically an interloper coming into that band for the first time. You know, they had established themselves as a gang of musicians who were on the Sunset Strip, being turned down by labels, being turned down by other clubs that wouldn't have them. And if he had suggested to them, which he thought about doing, hey, how about Sammy Hagar instead? They might stage a revolt and say, screw you. What are you're trying to get rid of our singer? And that's nuts. Why? And why would they go with somebody like Sammy Hagar, who wasn't really well known at the time? Why are they going to go with him? Ted Templeman, I think, made the right decision there, where he said, "Yeah, I don't want to rock this boat too much. Let me see what I can work with when you've got Dave, and see where we can go from there."
What do you think would have happened if Sammy was in the band from that point on?
I don't think they would have been as successful. I really don't. I think that at the time, for people who weren't guitar heads, for people who needed something more than to be blown away by Eddie's guitar playing, they needed someone like Dave that was doing lyrics that nobody else was really doing, that had these vocal inflections that nobody else was doing. I mean, I stand by it that he's a lyrical genius in some of the things he says. And he might not traditionally be the best singer out there, but he's got some amazing lyrics. And some of that wordplay, that's just incredible. And I don't think Sammy was able to do that as much. I mean, he's even admitted that he's got some really forgettable or regrettable lyrics. And I don't think you'll ever hear Dave say something like that.
And Dave also worked real hard at promoting that band, putting the flyers
He
up,
did.
Knocking on doors, getting that tape into the hands of Rodney Bingenheimer, the DJ in L.A., saying, "Look what we got here. Gene Simmons just produced our demo." He was
a
relentless.
Great self-promotion man.
Yeah,
I mean, he promoted them like no other. And I don't think Sammy had that drive, because Dave had to make up for his shortcomings. Sammy didn't, vocally. Sammy's got incredible vocals. His vocals are so good. He's a singer. But Dave knew that he was struggling a bit. I mean, he's the reason that Red Ball Jet could never make it is because Red Ball Jet, which was Dave's band before Van Halen, they had mediocre musicians, and they had a mediocre singer.
His stage presence too. You can't not notice Dave. As much as you notice Eddie playing, you could not notice David Lee Roth doing what he was doing on those stages. And as the stages get bigger, he's doing even more. Look at that 1984 tour. There's a show on YouTube from Montreal.
Montreal, right?
Oof. Yeah. You can. I know the band was at that point splintering off, and nobody was getting along, and they weren't on the same page. And then a lot of people say Dave took too much time bantering between songs. But what he could do at his peak, just like Noel Monk said, you cannot touch that band by the time they get to 1984, when they're all firing on all cylinders. And then MTV comes around, and Dave's in all his glory.
He was really untouchable as a frontman for a window of time. And you don't see guys being able to command a stage that size, like on the 1984 tour that Dave did. I mean, you've got Roger Daltrey from The Who can swing his microphone all he wants. But when you're on a stage of that size, you've got to do a little something extra to keep the attention of the crowd. And Dave did it. I mean, in that video that you mentioned, the Montreal one, he's back and forth on both sides of the stage. He's throwing kicks like crazy. He's doing jumps off of the drum riser. And it's hard not to keep your eye on him. Just this mass of a wave of blonde blur hair running from side to side. And it was pretty amazing.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. All right, guys, it's time to check out some of the new and upcoming Books on Rock releases. Shannon, by author Greg Prato, has just been released. It came out on November 1st. In 2008, Greg issued his first ever book, A Devil on One Shoulder and an Angel on the Other, the story of Shannon Hoon and Blind Melon, which, as its title states, retraced the life and career of one of rock's greatest yet tragic singers/performers of all time. Shannon is the much-anticipated follow-up. Paul McCartney's The Lyrics, 1956 to the present, was released through Live Right Books on November 2nd. Paul McCartney credited as the author, with Paul Muldoon as editor. A work of unparalleled candor and splendorous beauty, The Lyrics celebrates the creative life and the musical genius of Paul McCartney through 154 of his most meaningful songs. Wembley or Bust by ELO's Jeff Lynne, released through Genesis Publications on November 2nd. In its first official book, Jeff Lynne reveals the meticulous planning leading up to the epic Wembley or Bust concert and shares the stories behind a career-spanning catalog of songs. Led Zeppelin, the biography by Bob Spitz, is due out through Penguin Press on November 9th. From the author of the definitive New York Times best-selling history of the Beatles comes the authoritative account of the group many call the greatest rock band of all time, arguably the most successful, and certainly one of the most notorious. My Life in Dire Straits, the inside story of one of the biggest bands in rock history by John Illsley, due out through Diversion Books, November 9th. The first and only inside story of one of the greatest bands in rock history, Dire Straits, as told by founding member and bassist John Illsley. Rock Concert, an oral history as told by the artists, backstage insiders, and fans who were there, by Mark Myers, due out November 9th through Grove Press. A lively, entertaining, wide-ranging oral history of the golden age of the rock concert, based on over 90 interviews with musicians, promoters, stagehands, and others who contributed to the huge cultural phenomenon that is live rock. Mark was a recent guest on the Booked on Rock podcast. You can hear that interview in episode 31. Neil Young on Neil Young, Interviews and Encounters by Arthur Lizzie, out on November 9th through Chicago Review Press. The life of rock's most durable troubadour in his own words. Bowie Odyssey 71 by Simon Goddard, due out November 11th through Omnibus Press. Goddard continues his groundbreaking immersive narrative of the world around David Bowie. Through the second year of the decade, he changed pop forever. Six String Stories by Eric Clapton, due out November 16th through Genesis Publications. Clapton reflects on a legendary career as told through the tools of his trade, his guitars. Collected together here for the first time are the instruments Clapton sold in 3 record-breaking auctions between 1999 and 2011 to benefit the Crossroads Treatment Center he founded in 1998. And Jimi Hendrix' Voodoo Child by Harvey and Ken Kubernick comes out November 23rd through Sterling Books. A unique tribute to Jimi Hendrix, featuring contributions by those who knew and worked with him, enhanced with images by the most renowned rock photographers of the era. Find a link to all the newest and upcoming books on rock releases on this episode's show notes page and on our website, bookedonrock.com. I know a few people, my older brother among them, who love Van Halen 2 so much so they say it's their favorite album. This is from 1979, the follow-up to the debut. They definitely avoided the sophomore slump. Women in Love in my top 5. Also on this, Dance the Night Away, Out of Love Again, Light Up the Sky, Beautiful Girls. All songs that don't get the airplay that the songs on the first album do, but all classics. Talk about this album. This was done in very short time, too.
Yeah, it was done really quickly. I mean, they were off the road and then right back in the studio. They went again with a cover doing You're No Good, which was made popular the most recently at that time by Linda Ronstadt. But that's not, and it didn't have the same impact as You Really Got Me. But what that album has is it's got stuff like Dance the Night Away, which is quite possibly the perfect pop song. Doesn't even have a solo from Eddie, but it's incredible. I mean, that song is amazing. It opened up a whole new door for mainstream audiences to come into. And for hardcore fans, you have stuff like Out of Love Again and Bottoms Up and just this crazy amounts of brilliance that followed in the same path of the first record. But I do like it more than the first record. And I don't know if it's just because I've heard the first so many times and so many of those songs get overplayed on the radio, but for my money, Van Halen 2 that's how you do a sophomore record. That's how you stay relevant and not fade away after a first album full of hits.
They follow with 1980s Women and Children First, and The Cradle Will Rock, Everybody Wants Some, Romeo Delight, Take Your Whiskey Home, In a Simple Rhyme. And here Eddie continues to explore. It's another platinum seller. There is some debate behind what really went down at the album photo shoot for this album. Some say it almost broke up the band. Some say that's completely untrue.
Greg Renoff was the one who originally did an article about that. Greg, of course, wrote Van Halen Rising, which came out a number of years ago. It catalogs the days of Van Halen before they got signed and up through the recording of the first record. And David Lee Roth had heard that Helmut Newton, the famed photographer, was in town, was in Los Angeles, cold called him at his hotel and said he wanted him to photograph the band. And Helmut Newton was so taken with Dave's audacity that he met with him, became enamored with him, as Dave could, if he wasn't going to be a singer, he would have been the best used car salesman on the planet. and went back to the Roth mansion, which David Lee Roth's father owned, and started taking shots of Dave not even waiting until the rest of the band got there. And even when they did get there, the band saw that Helmut Newton was more interested in David Lee Roth than he was in anybody else in the band. They were kind of dressing almost on the side, and they didn't want to use the photographs. And Dave didn't understand it, but they felt like they were slighted. They were being put down as sort of his backing band on prints. Obviously, that wasn't true when it was in the band itself. But Dave did end up getting a little bit of a caveat, if you will, on the record. If you know, the first million copies, I guess it was, of Women and Children First had a full-size poster of Dave chained up to a fence, a chain link fence, from that photo shoot. But ultimately, they weren't the photos that were used, but Dave got that little pinup in there for a lot of his female admirers.
Yeah, I remember getting that poster.
I searched so many used record stores to find that when I was younger, to make sure that I had a copy of it, of just that poster. I remember getting a really beat up copy of Women and Children First. I don't even think I had a record player at the time, and I got that poster in it, and they had no idea what they had. Now you can find it anywhere. I think it's been it's been released in the remasters that came out a few years ago, the vinyl remasters. But it was, for a Van Halen fan, that was a treasure to seek out when you were younger.
The Van Halen diehards will say 1981's Fair Warning is their best album. Unchained, Mean Streets, hear about it later. So This Is Love on this album. It is easily their darkest, both in the music and the cover art. Alex Van Halen picked out the piece used for the cover. Can you talk about the cover and what it means?
So the artwork for Fair Warning was taken from a huge poster print of what William Kurlick did, who was this European painter. And he painted that while he was basically in a psychiatric ward dealing with his depression and having doctors prodding and poking at him. They wanted to give him a lobotomy. The therapist there couldn't understand what was causing his depression. So he decided, let me paint what I'm feeling. And he ended up painting what looked like, if you step back, all of the things going on inside of his head. So Van Halen took just a little bit of that. Alex Van Halen was the one who actually discovered it. And they made their album cover and back album cover of Fair Warning based on just little snippets of that cover. And it's really dark when you think about it. But I think that the band were going through a really dark time. They were starting to explode. But personally, you had Eddie, who was looking to get married to Valerie Bertinelli. His brother didn't agree with that. Dave certainly didn't agree with that because it was going to take some of the shine out of his spotlight. And it's really representative of the album as a whole, the album sonically.
Yeah, it's extremely dark. I'm looking at it again here, and you get the one image of a guy, looks like he's either just knocking his head into a brick wall.
Yeah, just to a brick wall. And Alex wanted to make that the full cover, just that, of the guy putting his head against the wall.
Oh, really? Yeah, because you kind of word it better. It's like he's putting his head against the wall. I don't even know if he's slamming it into the wall or he's just putting it against the wall and trying to walk up against it or something. It's just an odd.
Kurlick had said that part in particular was basically an exercise in futility because you're bashing your head against a brick wall. You're not going to get anywhere. But that's what he felt like he was doing at certain points, which maybe the band felt that they were doing it at certain points while recording the record.
I was about to say symbolic, right?
Yeah,
especially with Eddie. He's banging his head against the wall, trying to get some stuff on tape and on record. And Dave and Ted Templeman they're not having it. So he ends up going there in the middle of the night with the engineer, Don Landee, and recording a lot of that stuff in the middle of the night. And that's what eventually leads to the creation of his own studio 5150.
Yeah, and they didn't even know, according to Eddie, they being Ted Templeman, the rest of the band, they didn't notice that he was going in and re-recording and overdubbing a lot of his guitar work. They just didn't even notice. And that could be the perfectionist in him. But I'd really be interested in hearing what it was that he wasn't liking in his takes. But then again, you look at Eruption. We mentioned it earlier. It's flawless as it is, but Eddie was hearing something in that, and in the recordings of the early demos of Fair Warning that he wasn't satisfied with.
Speaking of the demos, how about, did you hear Dweezil Zappa talking about in his interview at Sunset Sound about Unchained being written on the piano?
Yeah, I never heard that before. I thought that was fascinating.
Wouldn't that be cool if that was on a demo?
Absolutely. Yeah. I wonder how much is floating around in 5150 Studios or in the Warner Brothers archives, because I don't think that Eddie has much pre-1984 in his own library. And I don't know if that stuff was just kind of thrown away or just wasn't seen as holding on to something viable.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You include a portion of this chapter on the band's Oakland videos. Here's another mystery. They performed there in June of 1981. 3 songs were filmed for release. Hear about it later, So This Is Love and Unchained. And you write, quote, "The concerts in Oakland were professionally filmed, commissioned, and paid for by the label and the band, though to what degree has been a mystery in the ensuing 4 decades. Some of these videos are from the live shows and some are from the sound check." That was according to Noel Monk, I think, who first revealed that, I believe.
I think he might have said that, yeah, that's where that was from. But Noel never said whether there was a full show or not that existed. And that's what everyone's been looking for years. I mean, that was Van Halen at arguably their peak with David Lee Roth. And as far as a live band goes. And for years, all of us have wondered, is there video of the entire Oakland show? Was it all recorded? I mean, sure, you can find the audio bootlegs of it out there, like a lot of the shows from that era. But how about the video? And I tracked down the director, Bruce Gowers, and asked him point blank, what is out there? How much does Warner Brothers have? He said, just those 3 songs. That's all they commissioned us to do. They picked the singles already before the record was released, and they were the songs that we were told that we were going to be recording. The rest of the concert, there was no benefit to that. There was no benefit to wasting film. Now, digitally, you can record everything, and it takes up a few megabytes or gigabytes of space. Back then, it was just looked at as, well, this is a bunch of excess tape that we're going to have that we're never going to use. Why bother recording it? So we'll do 2 different takes or 3 different takes of these 3 songs, do some of the stuff in sound check that we can't get when there's an audience in the house, and do the rest when it's the live show. And that's it. That's all there is of the Oakland 81 footage.
I think you alluded to it in the book. What a missed opportunity.
Completely missed opportunity.
Or someone was quoted as saying that in your book, I think.
It was William Duvall who sings for Alice in Chains these days. And he just said that such a lack of foresight into that by not recording it. It's just unbelievable, because he saw them on that tour. That was the first time that he caught them live, and he just thought they were amazing on there, just untouchable. And to not have anything recorded from that other than those 3 songs it's really it's kind of tragic, you know.
Yeah, we have the US Festival show. That's a professionally shot show. We have the ones that are in Washington at the Capitol Center, which they had that built-in camera.
Vision or
right. And I think that whatever was filmed was shown up on the big screen, maybe.
Yep. Yeah.
And so that is quote unquote professionally shot. But can you imagine if every tour they did, there was at least one professionally shot show? Like the Grateful Dead would record all of their shows because that was a way to cut down on overhead. They could just put a live album out without having to put up much money, and that was the reason they did it. Whatever reason a band chooses to do it, boy, you wish that all of them would do that, especially Van Halen, just to at least film these shows, just to go back and watch themselves and see how they did and say, oh, let's do this different, or let's try this and that. But they never did. It just, yeah, especially the 1984 tour. All we could watch is that grainy footage of somebody way back. At least we got it.
Yep.
But you're not getting the full effect of it. And think about it, the Panama video, right? That's live footage. What?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was filmed partially in Rhode Island and in Philadelphia at the Spectrum, and you wonder why not just record the whole show. At that point, you're a huge band. Let's just for posterity's sake, let's just record it. Nothing super crazy, but we've got the crew here. Let's record this.
Yeah. What about the
And-
Lost Weekend one in Detroit? The kid, what was
Yep.
the kid who won the contest Lost Weekend?
Kurt Jeffries.
Kurt Jeffries. Yeah. Imagine if
Yeah,
they just
yeah.
filmed that whole show, but they
Well,
just.
apparently there's so much footage that was left over that management said to MTV, you cannot use this footage. A lot of pre-show stuff, and I think that now it might pale in comparison to some of the things we've seen released out there. But back then, for that Lost Weekend, MTV was only given 10 minutes of usable footage, which is unbelievable if you think about it.
Let's talk about the Hide Your Sheep tour. You write that there are three avenues of thought as to the origins of the name of this 1982 Van Halen tour. What are the three possibilities?
Yeah, it was a play on the old joke that people would say to farmers out in the Midwest, hey, Van Halen's coming to town. You going to hide your daughters? And you respond saying, hide my daughters. I'm going to hide my sheep. And the other line of thought is that there was an AC/DC tour around that time. I believe it was for those about the rock, We Salute You. And they decided to call that the Hide Your Daughters tour. And for Van Halen, it was, well, we'll go one step further than Hide Your Daughters. We'll call it Hide Your Sheep. And the third line of thought, and this is just the most basic one, is there was that old saying back in the 17 or 1800s, whenever it was, when there was going to be trouble coming to town. Well, trouble's coming to town. You've got some, I don't know, Jesse James and his crew are coming to town. Lock up your daughters, lock up your wives. There's trouble on the way. And with Van Halen coming to town, there was definitely trouble on the way.
So at this time, as we now know, we talked about this is when Eddie is extremely frustrated. He feels caged in by Dave and producer Ted Templeman in terms of what was going to end up on the record. He had a lot of ideas that were shot down. He snuck into the studio in the middle of the night with engineer Don Landy to record. But what happened next with Diver Down, that frustrated him even more. Diver Down released in 1982, a lot of covers on this album. Eddie was not happy with that. And it's his frustrations with Diver Down that leads to a lot of what we hear on that next album, which is 1984. Eddie builds his own studio called 5150. Now, this is something I didn't know. I read in your book. Ted Templeman had no idea Eddie intended it to be where all of the band's music would be created. So he knew about it, but he just assumed it would be something that Eddie would be using just to kind of tinker with different ideas. But it wouldn't be the place.
Yeah, it was like, oh wow, cool. You got a little home studio. That's nice. It's a cute little thing to have. And then when Eddie says that he wants to record 1984 there, he's basically aghast. He had been to this studio, and it's a disaster. I mean, it's like any great artist or somebody who is, to the outside world, it looks like they're completely disorganized. There's things all over the place, and how could you possibly find anything in this mess? Well, Eddie's the only one that knows where everything is, and I guess Don Landy to a degree. But there's exposed wires, there's cables going to who knows where. Ted Templeman can't be the typical producer or do his typical producing duties when you've got this craziness laid out in the studio. Plus, it's really small. At the time, it was half the size of what it would end up becoming. And he thought, if we're going to record this there, it's completely insane to do something like that when we've got these great studios that Warner Brothers owns. We can just use them. But Eddie wanted more control. And that was when he really started to assert his control, not only in the recording process, but I think as a member of the band as well.
We talked about Don Landy. He's very low-key. He doesn't like to do a lot of interviews. That's a guy that Van Halen fans would love to hear from. But he's just not interested in that, huh?
Yeah, he's really not. And he really keeps everything close to the vest. I mean, he was the only one credited on a later record on OU812, which was self-produced by the band. But Don Landy's the only one that's given any credit as far as being outside of the group that had anything to do with that. He was there from the very beginning with Van Halen and right up through OU812. And I bet he's got some great stories, but he was also the source of a lot of craziness that was going on at the time, specifically in the recording of 1984, where he and Eddie would be staying up night after night working on the material, overdubbing it, re-recording this. And it was to the point where the record got delayed because they wouldn't release the masters. And Eddie played dumb while Don Landee would run out the back door with the masters after Ted Templeman came knocking. It got pretty crazy there for a while, but Don Landee, if not only having the front row seat for it, also was a major contributor to it as well.
I don't think he worked ever again after Van Halen in the music business. I think he walked away from it.
I'm pretty sure that's what happened. I mean, I certainly don't remember anything off the top of my head that he had done with them.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. As we know, 1984 is a massive hit. Jump Panama, Hot for Teacher, I'll Wait, all hit singles, whether it be on the radio, MTV, or both. And then suddenly Dave is out. And you write about how the timeline of Dave's departure from the band has never really been clear.
Yeah, it's really weird that that's never been completely confirmed, but also it was a different time. And I know that's an easy way to justify not knowing why. And when there's not a press release that comes out from any band that sneezes today, everybody has to know, whether it's through social media or from a record label or publicist. They have to let you know exactly what's going on with that band. And the popular line of thought for years was that it was on April Fool's that Dave announced that he was out of the band, or the band announced that Dave was out. And that's not the case. It's simply not what happened. Was it around that area? Was it around the spring of 1985? Yes, probably. But it didn't get reported officially until late July in Rolling Stone magazine. And it was for an issue that came out with the August date on it, the first week of August. And it was this wasn't a huge cover story. This wasn't even a huge article. It was in the random notes section of that Rolling Stone magazine, and the speculation about whether Eddie and Valerie Bertinelli were breaking up. And one of the last sentences says, yeah, by the way, we're looking for a new singer. Dave's out. And that wasn't huge news. It was just this little bit of a tidbit that Eddie and Valerie weren't getting divorced. But by the way, Eddie and Dave did get divorced. And it was reported in some newspapers once they got that saw the viability of it. But I'm talking newspapers in secondary markets or places like Atlanta that are just running the Rolling Stone piece and running a headline saying Van Halen's looking for a new singer. But it didn't really get traction. And it took news then was so slow to travel. And most people didn't know until, post Farm Aid, when Eddie showed up with Sammy Hagar, when Hagar was doing a solo set there.
How the hell does Rolling Stone not run with that? How is the bells and whistles not going off? That just tells you that I don't think they cared.
I don't think they did. And I think that they didn't understand what they had on their hands. And I think that to a degree,
the biggest rock and roll band in the world at that point, and you have Eddie saying we're looking for a new singer, and they're not thinking, whoa, hold on. Let's restructure this. We got to do something with this. No. I've
got to think other writers there were thinking, this is pretty big news. But Jan Wenner, the publisher at the time, just thinking, I'm not really into these rock and roll bands. He never was. He was more into singer-songwriters, Bob Dylan's, the Neil Youngs, the John Lennon. He wasn't into the Zeppelin. He wasn't into the AC/DCs. That's why those bands hardly ever, if ever, appeared on the cover of Rolling Stone. It was always him catering to what he liked. And even though they were sort of the rock music magazine of record, they didn't really cater to the heavier and hard rock and roll, which is what so many people fell in love with. That's why you have all these publications like Hit Parader and Circus. Those sorts of things start coming more into prominence for rock fans. And when they got wind of it, when they heard that Dave was out of Van Halen, that's when it was on the cover. You had David Lee Roth on the cover of Circus with headlines screaming, "Is this the end of Van Halen?"
Yeah, that's the one that says the most unlikely pair in rock and roll or something underneath it. It was Ed and Dave together, or am I thinking of a different one? That might have been before.
No, you're right. Yeah, because it was, they were the ones that would dive deep. They would dig deep into what was going on with Van Halen when other publications, including the mainstream media, just didn't care. And it's always been that way with hard rock and to a stronger degree heavy metal. And Van Halen was considered heavy metal at the time, but for instance, you didn't see much coverage at all of Black Sabbath in Rolling Stone. They just didn't care. That wasn't the powers that be type of music. So who cares if Ozzy leaves and Dio comes in? We didn't like Rainbow anyway. We didn't like any of those bands. So we're not going to promote it. We're not going to go crazy with it. We're wasting valuable space that can be given to the Eagles.
But here's the thing now. Here's the argument against Rolling Stone not caring. They had Dave on the cover, April 11, 1985. I'm just thinking timeline here. So when is that? That's before. Wait, is that before Eddie made that quote?
Yes, it's before. So you figure that article was written probably in January, if not sooner, and then doesn't publish until April. And the thing that Eddie said was probably relayed to Rolling Stone in late June, maybe early July. Probably early July, because it made it into random notes.
But if Dave's important enough to be on the cover in April, you would think then that would suggest that they would have had a huge article on their breakup, on that quote from Eddie.
Yeah, I mean, logic would dictate that.
Strange.
And to this day, it boggles my mind. Like, why is the whole, put the band on the cover with showing a photograph of them split with Dave or something. To me, that would seem like huge news. But when they put Dave on the cover, that was after he had done the Crazy from the Heat EP, and it was something more palatable for mainstream audiences. It was songs like Just a Gigolo or California Girls. This is stuff that suburban housewives are listening to, not just the crazy kids that are in high school driving around in their sports cars and smoking weed in the parking lot before they went to high school. This is something that we're putting a character on the cover at that point, basically. And that's what Dave was. I mean, you look at that picture of him, he's got his hat on and he's just making that open mouth face. And that's not as serious as Van Halen splitting up or whatever the narrative is that they would have tried to paint it at that point.
I have to think that Dave just thought, I'll be back, because you're not expecting this band to go on and do what they did with Sammy Hagar. So we'll go our separate ways. I'll do my thing, and Eddie will do his thing, and give it a few years. Just a total guess.
Sure he was banking on them failing.
Sure. Who thought they would do anything other than that? Other than the band themselves.
And Dave did not bank on himself failing, which is what ultimately happened with his solo career. Now, he had some people would die to have the solo career that David Lee Roth had across 2 albums or 2 albums and an EP. But the fact is, all the money, if you were looking at a betting line in Vegas, they would have put all the odds on David Lee Roth being the one that was successful. Because who cares what Van Halen's going to do with this guy who was, to most people, just known as the I Can't Drive 55 guy. And that's it. Like, oh yeah, he had a great song on MTV, kind of this kitschy little thing, this I Can't Drive 55 and jumping around in his yellow jumpsuit. But that's not going to replace David Lee Roth, the frontman extraordinaire, the one that all these other bands that are coming up are blueprinting themselves after. No way. And, to this day, it's proof that Van Halen was more than the sum of its parts. Not only that, it was driven by Eddie and his playing and his musical brilliance, because they end up putting out 5150, which isn't even a guitar-based record. I mean, that's more keyboard-based than it is guitar-based.
And before we get to the Sammy era, you do include the recent revelation by Steve Perry of Journey, who is among the names that there's been a few names coming up here and there over the years that say, yeah, I know I was offered the job, or I was kind of almost, it could have happened. I was talking to Steve Perry of Journey is among the guys who said there was a possibility of him trying out for the job.
Yeah, so many people have come out of the woodwork since Eddie's passing. I mean, even Ozzy said that Eddie said they should get something together. But I honestly think look, we all know, this is no secret at all. We know that Eddie had a major drinking problem. And I know that, if I have a bunch of drinks, I get on the phone with somebody, I'm like, yeah, we got to get together. We got to hang out. Did they seriously consider bringing Ozzy Osbourne in as the replacement for David Lee Roth? I don't think so. Did they really think that they were going to bring in Steve Perry? I think that's just maybe some drunken rambling from Eddie. I mean, he didn't even tell the rest of the band when Dave came back in 96 that he was going to be bringing him by the studio. They just didn't know. So I bet if you ask Michael Anthony, did you guys really seriously consider Ozzy Osbourne coming into the band or Steve Perry? He'd say, I didn't even know that until they mentioned it. It's not like they were rehearsing in the studio with Steve Perry or Ozzy or anybody else. I think the closest it got was with Patti Smythe from Scandal. And I don't even know if Michael Anthony was there for that, but they were just, throwing names out there. They were throwing ideas out there because Dave leaving really left them in a predicament.
But as we know, Sammy steps in and does an amazing job. And I got to be fair, I love the Sammy era. And I am like you. If you had to nail me down on the decision, it's the Dave era. But just so many great songs, so many great memories attached to that era with Sammy. So you cannot deny it. But here's the question I have for you. Would you have changed their name? Because this was Warner Brothers was worried about the band and what would happen to that brand. They wanted it to be changed to Van Hagar. Do you agree with their decision to keep the name? Would you have changed it?
No, I disagree with that. If they would have looked at, well, they did look at that as, well, we're giving up our name. Our name's Van Halen. But even deeper than that, I think it makes them being Van Halen, it makes Van Halen look like they don't have the confidence in themselves. So we're going to rename ourselves. And that already puts them behind. They're already behind an 8-ball, but that just adds one more layer to it. If they're now Van Hagar, people are always going to say the former Van Halen, the band formerly known as Van Halen, the band that couldn't make it without David Lee Roth, so they had to change their name to Van Hagar. I mean, that's something that would have looked bad on them, and it would have given Dave so much ammunition. He would have said, they can't even keep the name Van Halen without me. They can't even move forward without me, so much so that they had to change their name. But they stuck to their guns. They said, no, we're Van Halen. They told the label that. They told management that. And they told, more importantly, they told themselves. And they had that confidence that they were going to be able to pull it off with a new singer, which, as you know, doesn't really happen that often.
That first single, Why Can't This Be Love, is a huge hit. It's number 3. But here's the big what if here. What if the band's debut single and album, which was 5150, wasn't a hit? How soon does Dave come back? Timetable, what would you throw out there as a date? Would he be back before the beginning of the 90s?
Yeah, he's definitely back before the beginning of the 90s. I think a lot of it depends on whether that tour with Sammy Hagar is successful or it falls into some category like the Gary Sharon era where you've got that curiosity factor at the beginning, but then you're playing the half-empty venues and no one really wants to hear the I Can't Drive 55 guy singing David Lee Roth songs when David Lee Roth is out there singing them better than Sammy ever could. But they went all in. They had that success with Sammy. And not only that, live, they were just playing every song, save for Inside, from 5150 each night. They were coming out there like a new band. They were being a new band, right or wrong as it is, because I would have preferred they did more Dave era songs over the years with Sammy, but they didn't. But it really, they showed something. They showed that they don't need David Lee Roth for their name or for their music. And that's why they would only be so successful with Sammy.
Yeah, Sammy was talking about how he just recently said we wanted to just play the album, and then we realized we're going to have to fill some time here, so what are we going to do? So then they add rock and roll, Zeppelin's rock and roll. They add a couple Sammy tunes. They did I Can't Drive 55. They did Only One Way to Rock. They didn't do Jump that tour.
No, they did it a few times when they would either have somebody from the audience sing it.
Okay.
Or I know one show, I think in Florida, they brought a local DJ on to do it.
That's right.
And some shows, they would do Wild Thing by the Trogs.
Wild Thing, which there's a recording of that out there. It's a B-side, I think, or it's a professional recording of it from the Live Without a Net.
Well, it's also, yeah, because that was...
or was it an FM radio? It might have been like one of those Westwood One radio deals or something. It was something that was professional recorded, and it's up there. It's out on YouTube. I downloaded and put it in my phone.
Because You Really Got Me out there as well, which opened the show.
You're right.
But that's not on the Live Without the Net video. And yeah, but they would do everything but almost touch on that era, touch on the original era of Van Halen.
Panama, they did. Panama.
And Ain't Talking About Love.
Ain't Talking About Love.
And here's what occasionally Jump.
Occasionally Jump. Here's what's interesting. I didn't even realize. I just put something up on the Van Halen news desk about the last show of the 5150 tour, which was at the Cow Palace in just outside of San Francisco. They played Red, Sammy Hagar's Red. And according to setlist.fm, that was the only time they ever played it. And that's from Sammy's 77 solo album, Red. It was part of the encore. Part of the encore, yeah. I mean, they would throw in some... Yeah, isn't that cool? They would throw in... they did Rock Candy, I think, a few times.
Yep. I know they did Rock Candy a few times. I don't know if they did Bad Motor Scooter or not.
I don't think so. I
think that has a little bit too much of Ronnie Montrose's stamp on it.
Yeah.
For Eddie to want to mess around with that.
And as we know, Dave puts together a kick-ass band for that first full-length solo album, Eat 'Em and Smile. Yankee Rose Going Crazy, their hit singles, the album goes platinum. His 85 release, Crazy from the Heat, that was an EP. So this is the first full album, and he's got Stevie Vai on guitar, Billy Sheehan on bass, Greg Bissonette on drums. Here's another what if. What if Dave stayed with that lineup? He did one more album with them, 1988 Skyscraper, which went platinum, just like Paradise, top 10 single. But after that, different lineups, his commercial success goes downhill. What if he sticks with that lineup?
I think if he sticks with that lineup, you don't get what came in its wake, because they were more into being a rock band. And when Dave started playing around with keyboards and bringing in, I guess it was Brett Tuggle for Skyscraper, that was when Steve Vai and Billy Sheehan especially lost interest. They didn't want to be in a band that wasn't a rock band, that was more experimental at best, or at worst focusing more on keyboards, when keyboards were starting to die out a little bit in rock and roll come the year that Skyscraper comes out. So if they do stay together, that's Dave kind of sucking it up and saying, well, Skyscraper didn't do as well as Eat 'Em and Smile. Let's get back to the basics of rock and roll. By that point, the rest of those guys were checked out. And I don't know. I mean, A Little Ain't Enough is a really great rock record. And I would have loved to have seen what that lineup could have done with that.
Yeah, Bob Rock produced that too. So he had a big name producer. Yep. And he's got that young gunslinger, Jason Becker. And sadly, we know his health became an issue. Lou Gehrig's disease, just around the time he was recording that 1991 album, A Little Ain't Enough, that was when he was diagnosed with it. But meanwhile, Van Halen's For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge is out in 91. They are doing just fine, and it makes me wonder if maybe Sammy came along at the right time, image-wise, because Dave, fair or not, he had the 80s hair metal label put on him, which I hate, but I think that's what he was a victim of. I think with especially a song like Right Now, which did not sound anything at all like Van Halen in the 80s, didn't sound anything at all like an 80s song. I think that was a huge factor in Van Halen being able to make that transition into the 90s.
Yeah, I don't think anything on For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge sounds like an 80s band. Whereas some of the stuff Dave was doing does sound like an 80s band. I mean, as much as I love songs like, Showtime, that sounds a lot like a Hot for Teacher retread, but more importantly, it sounds a little too 80s for me. And Van Halen was just, there's no other way to put it. They were maturing. And a lot of that has to do with maybe not lyrically, but looks wise for Sammy's involvement. I mean, he didn't look like David Lee Roth did. And, David Lee Roth was sort of the catharsis for all those bands that came in the wake of the hair metal genre. And everybody wanted to look like David Lee Roth. And pretty soon, those bands like Poison and Warrant and whoever else, they were becoming the punchline to music. And Dave was sort of falling into that trap, mainly because he inspired the rest of them to look that way. Nobody was going out there dressed like Sammy Hagar. No one was looking like Sammy Hagar. Nobody said, hey, let me get a perm out there and maybe I'll cut it a little bit shorter and look like this. They looked like they could seamlessly fit into a new decade, where Dave seemed stuck back in the one that had just ended.
Similar to what Eddie went through. Like, everybody points at Dave, blame him for all of the cheesy hairband frontmen, and then blame Eddie for all the guitarists that played a million notes with no feeling. Mm-hmm. It's not fair because they were the originators, but that's what can happen. And then Dave tried to make a change that was drastic with Your Filthy Little Mouth in 1994 and changes his look, cuts his hair, the sound is different, he's got a whole new band. Things got even worse. I mean, that didn't do well at all. But then Van Halen follows in 95 with Balance. Can't Stop Loving You is a top 40 single. Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do, a rock radio hit. And things are going still fine for Van Halen, although some people here and there would say, yeah, they're kind of losing a little bit. I didn't think so. I love Balance. But anyway, they survived the grunge era. But there are problems internally that have been building. The guys seem to be so close for so long, at least it seemed that way. But Sammy has said that things started to go downhill when their longtime manager Ed Loeffler passed away and Rush manager Ray Daniels stepped in. So talk about that whole period there. What do you think led up to the departure of Sammy?
I'm like you, where I really think that Balance is incredibly underrated as a record. I know that there's a lot of unfinished ideas on there. I get that. I get that some of the songs aren't everyone's cup of tea. But that was another number one record for them. No other hard rock band was really doing that in the wake of the grunge explosion. But again, you have Eddie wanting to assert more control. You've got this band that isn't really, while it may be Sammy's primary musical outlet, he's not living at 5150 Studios anymore. He's not spending every waking hour there. He's got a new girlfriend, soon to be his new wife, and Carrie. And Eddie starts to feel, well, if this guy's not all in, then I want to move on and I guess hopefully find somebody who will be all in his mind. I mean, that's all he and Alex would do is through, I would say, almost their entire career. They were living at the studio. They were living to just jam with one another. And right or wrong, they might have looked at Sammy as starting to neglect the group a little bit, which then, of course, leads to Eddie accusing Sammy of wanting to be a solo artist and to go back to being a solo artist. And Sammy just basically saying, look, I've got this life that I'm living. You guys are my number one musically, but I have to have this personal life. Eddie's personal life and his professional life were Van Halen.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. I still remember where I was when David Lee Roth walked out on stage with Van Halen at the 1996 MTV Video Awards. Goosebumps. Dave is back. I never had the chance to see Dave in the original lineup, 78 to 84 days, so this was my chance. They recorded 2 new songs. Holy shit. This is a dream come true. And then it all comes crashing down. And there's a picture in your book that says it all. Backstage at the MTV Awards that night, Ed, Al, and Mike shoulder to shoulder on the left, and there's Dave alone on the right, arms folded, looking pissed. Something was off about that night, and we would find out soon after. Dave was out. Gary Cherone is in. What do you recall about that time as a Van Halen fan? Where were you that night? Do you remember that?
Well, like you, I'll never forget that night. I was at a friend of mine's apartment. We had heard rumors that Van Halen were going to be coming out with Dave at the VMAs, but back then the internet was still in its infancy, and you didn't know for sure. So we got together, and we're watching this, and we see Dave come out, and I look back on it now when I see that, and I see the interview with Kurt Loder that was also broadcast. I see the uncomfortability that Eddie had. I see how just mortified he looked at David at being on stage with David Lee Roth. And when Dave says, we have an announcement to make, and Eddie for a second is thinking, you can almost read his mind saying, what the hell is going on here? Back in that time, though, we're exchanging high fives. We'd recorded it, so we're watching it over and over again on the VCR, and just marveling at the fact that we're going to get to see Van Halen with David Lee Roth for the first time. This is going to be amazing. Because like you, I hadn't seen them with David Lee Roth in the live era. And
by the way, none of us ever thought we'd see the day they'd be on stage together again. There was no way. Not only that, we never thought Sammy would be out. I mean, those guys were brothers, best friends. So this was mind-blowing. This was mind-blowing.
It was. It was a shock. And it was, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it now, just thinking about that moment. I mean, like, wow. Dave looks a little different. He's got that brown hair. He doesn't have the best outfit on, but man, if he isn't talking the talk like he did before, this band is back.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I was blinded by, in retrospect, looking back at the videos, you could see Ed is uncomfortable. I was just so blinded by the moment that I was like, who gives a shit? Whatever, they're up there.
Yeah, and they never got along. I mean, and I think Dave said that on Stern after that. He said, what's new? We never got along. Well, great, no big deal. Whatever issue they're having that is a little bit perceptible here, then they'll get over it. They always do, don't they? But they didn't. And to see it fall apart the way it did in such public and spectacular fashion was really a tough time to be a fan. And it was even tougher when you've got Gary Cherone coming in, because you don't even get, well, at least they went back to Sammy. It's now they got that guy. Like, what are they trying to do? You're like, yeah, he's a great singer, but he doesn't fit in Van Halen.
Well, Mitch Malloy had a good point. Mitch Malloy is the guy that was in the band for minutes, if not hours. He said that basically Eddie said, you got the job. And then Mitch said when he saw the MTV Awards, he realized at that point that no matter who takes the position as lead singer of Van Halen, the letdown is going to be there, because people have now seen Dave up on stage, which made me think, was Eddie aware of just how big a moment that was? Because that's similar to, like, say Kiss walks out on remember when Kiss gets back together in full makeup and Tupac introduces them at the award ceremony, and imagine Kiss goes up there in all full makeup, all four guys, people go nuts, they go apeshit, and then the next day, guys, Ace and Peter they're not here. We're gonna bring in Eric Singer and Tommy Thayer, and it's gonna be a great what? You're doing what? So that's kind of what the feeling was there. It was like a hangover, and I wanted to believe that it was going to work with Gary. I really did, because I thought, hey, Eddie's got the magic, man. He has got the magic touch. So let's just give it a listen. What did you think when you first heard "Without You," the first single with Gary Cherone? I
thought it was a great song. I thought, well, it doesn't really sound like Van Halen as much as it was missing the backing vocals. I thought you had that Michael Anthony Eddie combination that worked so well with Sammy and with Dave. I wasn't hearing that, but man, that guitar playing, you can't dismiss that. Gary sounds, no pun intended, he sounded good enough, but was it good enough for the mainstream audiences? And I didn't know. And then I remember hearing the full record of Van Halen 3 when it played on, I guess it was Premier Radio Networks, and it was just broadcast all over the country, and just losing interest halfway through it and thinking, well, maybe it's just a grower. Maybe I'll learn to like these songs, but they seem awfully long, and they seem awfully un-Van Halen-like. And I don't, even if they don't walk out with Dave, I don't think that record does much, if any, better.
Do you have any other songs other than Without You that you like?
I really like Josephina, which is
Really?
funny
Okay.
because I heard that I think it was Gary that told me that wasn't going to be on the record, that they weren't going to have that on there, and I do like that. I like Ballad of the Bullet. I mean, there's songs that I like just because of Eddie's playing. I mean, I love Primary. I think
Yeah.
that's really some interesting guitar work by Eddie. Some of the other stuff on there, it's Fire in the Hole was good. It was a good rock song. I do like Without You. I think that was a great choice for the first single. If not that, they should have gone with Fire in the Hole. But I don't know, just some of it is lacking. I mean, A Year to the Day, I can find elements in it that I like, but I feel like a lot of the songs were a little bit too verbose for Van Halen. It was a little too experimental.
Lyrically very different than anything they put on tape.
You don't expect that level of seriousness from Van Halen, and I think that you got a little bit of that with Mine All Mine, Right Now, but there was a little bit too much of it, and people couldn't deal with these somewhat esoteric lyrics at times from Gary Cherone that you don't want from your 3 and 4 minute songs from a hard rock band.
In defense of the album, I'm going to give you the songs I like here. So I'm going to say Without You, I do like.
Mm-hmm.
When I Want, I like.
I do like When I Want.
From Afar, I don't like. I never got into From Afar. Dirty Water Dog, I like. I think that's cool.
I can get behind that.
Although some will say that ending to the song should be a whole song in itself. It's got that groove to it, right? Once, I like.
I'm not a fan of Once.
Okay. People compare that to Peter Gabriel, which is interesting because I think Eddie was a fan of Peter Gabriel. Fire in the Hole, I like. So. But you know what? The Fire in the Hole, I wish it had that Bruce Fairbairn production sound of balance on that track. It seems like Alex's drums, if it is Alex, because I've been told now that Eddie did play drums on some of these tracks, so that might not be Alex, I don't know. But the track itself is good. Josephina, that's where we differ. I'd never liked Josephina. Year to the Day, I do like. I love the solo.
It's got a great solo.
Primary into Ballad of the Bullet, I like it, yeah. How Many CAI is the one that took a lot of hits. But Gary's the one who encouraged Eddie to sing that. I think Eddie wanted Gary to sing on it, and Gary told him, no, go for it. Take it yourself.
Yeah, he was the impetus behind that. And I think that they were just feeling so creative with one another. Like, let's just do this. I mean, they were just so infatuated with one another. Like, wow, Eddie, you sang that on that demo tape. Why don't you just sing it on the record? And Eddie had never thought about doing something like singing on the record. None of his singers would ever acquiesce to something like that in the past. And here's this guy encouraging him to do it. They just had that level of infatuation with one another where I think they lost the plot a bit of what a Van Halen record should sound like or what people expect. And I'm all for artistic growth, but you didn't have, in Mike Post, you didn't have a producer that was able to kind of reel them back in a little bit and say, guys, like on OU812 when Eddie was playing a little bit too much keyboards. There's an interview he did with, I believe it was Rolling Stone at the time. And he says, I love just screwing around with stuff and all these different sounds. But every now and again, they say, Eddie, come on, we need some more guitar. You're a guitarist. Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, no one was there to reel them back in. You've got Eddie's golfing buddy who was just probably over the moon excited to be in the studio with Van Halen and getting the opportunity to produce a record. I mean, I would love to produce a record by Van Halen. I'd love to write lyrics for a Van Halen record. And you just feel lucky to be there. Whereas somebody like a Ted Templeman will say, hey, guys, pull it back. Or Bruce Fairbairn saying, we need to tighten this up a little bit. I mean, don't forget, Bruce Fairbairn's the one that came and said, hey, the label isn't going to hear a single off of this. We need a good pop song. And they come up with Can't Stop Loving You, which is, the perfect, one of their most perfect pop songs this side of Dance the Night Away. but they didn't have anybody to tell them that on Van Halen 3. And that's where it gets that tag of being unfocused, a little too experimental, and a little too out there for Van Halen fans.
And where was Mike? Where was Mike? No Mike Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, non-existent. I feel like those vocals just aren't really there. I know that Eddie played a ton of bass on that record, and how much is up for debate, but I don't think that you've got that core Van Halen sound really anywhere on that record. I mean, are there good rock songs? Are there good songs? Yes, there are. And in fact, you find a Tom Waits fan or a Roger Waters fan, and they're going to say, yeah, How Many Say I would be great on their record. That's not what I want from my Van Halen. That's not what I want to hear on my Van Halen record. Throw me some weird pieces. I'll take something like Inside. I'll take something like, something weird like Happy Trails. It's all fun little stuff. But to make something a serious statement, man, I want to get away from it. I don't want to think about homeless people when I'm listening to a Van Halen record. I want to hear nonsensical stuff like Panama. What the hell's a Panama? I don't know, but it sounds great. And it's going to sound even greater when I'm yelling it out at a concert at the top of my lungs. I'm not going to be yelling out How Many Say I at a concert. I'm going to be sitting there saying, man, this is a real bummer.
Yeah, Summer Nights in My Radio make you think of those days as a teenager cruising around with the windows down and blasting the radio. Yeah, that's what many have said. And after Van Halen 3, the band and the fans go through that long, dark period. Instead of new music every few years, we get articles about Dave maybe coming back again, but no. Dave goes out on tour. Sammy moves on as a solo artist. A lot of shots at Eddie, but Eddie isn't talking. I still waved that Van Halen flag throughout those years, but it was rough. What were those years like for you?
It's only now we're starting to find out how dark they were for Eddie. I mean, in that new book that's written by Brad Slinsky and Chris Gill, which is a fantastic book of interviews with Eddie, they've even said that he was in a dark place after Van Halen 3 because he just couldn't believe that he would have not the level of success that he might have had he brought Dave back, but that it was shunned so badly and criticized so harshly. As a fan, it was such a dark period because it's like, what the hell are these guys doing if they can't get it together with either of their former lead singers? I mean, that DLR band record is some of the best work that David Lee Roth has done since he left Van Halen. I mean, I put that right up there with the excitement I heard from hearing Yankee Rose and going crazy for the first time. That is just balls to the wall guitar work and amazing lyrics from Dave. That would have sounded great with Van Halen. But not hearing anything for so long. This is the band that's used to put out a record every year with Dave, and now, okay, it's a couple years before they put out something. Maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 3 years. But we're going from 98 until now it's 2000, it's 2001. We're not hearing anything from these guys. What the hell's going on? And now you've got the internet that is in full bloom, and you still don't know what's going on with this band. You've got Dave and Sammy going on tour together and fighting and coming out at the MTV Awards together. It almost becomes a parody of itself. And where the hell's Eddie? It's like, oh, wait a second, he's gonna score this porn film, which that was a little bit later than when they got back with Sammy. But it's like, what are these guys doing? They're wasting valuable time here.
You're a Boston guy. It's kind of like what Patriots fans are feeling now. You just expected your team to be winning every year, going to, if not winning the Super Bowl, to now just being an average team.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm a transplant to Boston from Philadelphia. So I am not a Patriots fan, but being from Philadelphia, I know all about the suffering of being a sports fan and coming this close and not getting there. And that's what it's like being a Van Halen fan for me. It's getting this close. Wow, we're in the Super Bowl, but we're against the Patriots. Well, that was like with David Lee Roth coming out on the VMAs, the 2004 Super Bowl with the Patriots, not when we finally did beat them years later. But as a fan and as Eddie Van Halen, you expect everything to turn to gold. With if you're a Boston sports fan, you don't know what life is like without a parade every year for one of your sports. And with Van Halen, not only you're not getting any parades, you're not getting any games. You got everybody tuning out. Well, what happened?
Yeah.
And is there ever a comeback from this?
And people taking shots at Eddie was something that I had not seen before.
He was getting beat up. I mean, look, you had Dave getting beat up for years, whether it was because of the pot bust in New York or because of his receding hairline. And sure, you could make fun of Sammy's lyrics and you could make fun of some of the outfits he was wearing when it wasn't in fashion anymore to come out in a checkered suit. I don't know if it was ever in fashion, but to come out in a checkered suit at the VMAs.
Remember that? Yeah.
Have, Kurt Cobain playing at the same time and beat up jeans and a flannel. But you never took shots at Eddie. Nobody ever took shots at Eddie.
Never.
But all of a sudden, he was now the focal point for derision from both critics and even some fans. And I think there were a lot of fans who were just pissed that they weren't getting anything. They weren't getting any new music. They weren't even getting any Gary Sharon stuff anymore. You weren't getting to see them live. Where did our band go? That I think was a consensus from a lot of people.
We did get the return of Sammy in 2004. He did record some new songs for the best of. They went out on tour. That tour didn't end well. Eddie was struggling after his cancer diagnosis, and he was still battling his addictions. But we finally get the return of Dave in 2007. And as you write, quote, Eddie's emergence into the national spotlight post-rehab was the personification of a man transformed. Wow, isn't that true? He had that smile back. We had Dave back. We didn't have Mike in the band. That was a bummer, but we had the 2007 tour, the 2012 album, A Different Kind of Truth, the tour to follow, another tour in 2015. That sadly turned out to be the last. But what comes to mind when I think about that period is Eddie was on top of his game again. He looked great, sounded great. He was happy, had his kid Wolfgang with him. You wrote that Wolfgang deserves special recognition since without him, we wouldn't have had this return.
Yeah, and that's the trade-off you have to get. You get Dave back, but you don't get Michael Anthony. And, the running, I guess it's not a joke. It's just what people say is Michael Anthony class act. And he really is. But more than that, he's so integral to the Van Halen sound. But, I mean, I've never seen Eddie as happy as he was on stage than he was with Wolfgang. Like, yeah, he always had that smile, but he had this look of just adoration and joy being on stage with his son. And I think he wanted to play good with his son. And he didn't play good. He played amazing. I mean, again, I already did one pun with good enough, but he was on fire on those tours. His playing was borderline impeccable. You listen to some of the stuff he did on A Different Kind of Truth, which I think that record is phenomenal. And his playing on it is just brilliant. Those last couple tours, they were, I mean, almost dare I say worth the wait to get Dave back. I think they were all on the same page. One of the things Dave said at the press conference in 2007 was he certainly realized how important the history of the band was to his legacy. And I think they all realized that. I think they all knew that they couldn't take it for granted, which maybe some of that Sharon era stuff was just taking advantage of a fan base that, well, we can just put it out. People buy it. It's Van Halen. Well, they won't. They want something good. They want something great. And the reason that reunion with Dave lasted as long as it did is because Eddie delivered all the time on the reunion tour, the album, the tour to support the album, and then on that 2015 tour. And I did say Wolfgang deserves special recognition because I don't think without him, you end up opening shows with Light Up the Sky like you did in 2015. You don't get into doing those deep cuts. You don't say, hey, Dad, you know what really was cool? Those demos that never got released. How about we dig them up and kind of build upon that foundation? He really was the I mean, for lack of a better phrase, he was like the captain of the ship at that time, and he kind of steered them in the right direction. And it sucks. It sucks we didn't get what could have been, but we did get something incredible in those last several years with Dave back fronting the band.
And it was Wolfgang that broke the news of Eddie's passing. You wrote, "The roaring horns signaling the launch of Van Halen on Running with the Devil all those years before fell silent. On October the 6th of 2020, Wolfgang broke the heartbreaking news via statement on social media. Where were you the day you learned the news, and what was your first reaction?"
I woke up that morning to a text from my best friend that just said, "fuck." And I'm like, he's not the type to say stuff like that or just be so oblique and where I'm supposed to be guessing. I think I had a show the night before and I was out late. So he just assumed that I was already up. I was already, online and doing my thing, but I was a little bit late to the party, maybe by an hour or so. And the first thing I did was, well, let me open Facebook. And it's like nothing but notifications, nothing but people sharing stuff about Eddie. And I'm thinking about it now, and just like I can feel the tears welling up. Like it was a shock, because you heard that he was sick, but you didn't hear it from any reputable source. You hear it from TMZ, and which I know they're reputable as much as people hate to admit it, but you were hearing it from people like AJ Benza, the gossip people. But to know that now he's gone, that's it. We're done. We're done. There is no Van Halen without Eddie Van Halen. And to have so many misguided people say, well, Wolfgang can play drums, he can play guitar, he can take over for him. It's like, no, you've ripped out the soul of that band. And that's not to take anything away from Wolfgang, who was an amazing player in his own right. And Mammoth, WVH is an incredible album that he put together, and an incredible band that he's put together, but he's not his father. And I respect him so much for not trying to do a thing where, I'm gonna make something off of this name. I'm gonna try and get Sammy back, and we'll throw it all together, and I'll even get Mike back in here and I'll play guitar. No, you don't have a Van Halen without Eddie. And I was heartbroken knowing that was it, that we were done with this band now. It was over. I mean, that's it. It was over. And it made me start thinking, and this kind of brings it back full circle to, what's my history with this band? And I start thinking about stuff like, I wrote an article about when I went to the Cafe Wah show. Like I didn't know I was going to be going to that show in 2012 until an hour or two before. And I had to scramble to get from Boston down to New York City. I started thinking about how I first discovered Van Halen. I thought about the times that I've either interviewed or met the band, all the band members over the years, and I've met and or interviewed all of them. And I just start thinking about all this stuff, and I'm like, man, these guys have a story that should be told. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with the Eruption and the Aftershock, and have it come from a personal place. I couldn't have written this book about any other band that I love. I mean, I love the Beatles. I love Zeppelin. I love the Stones. I love think of those marquee names. None of them had that effect on me that Van Halen did, both musically and then what they brought to the table personally, that you got wrapped up in. Whether it was Dave coming back and then not being in the band, I didn't throw in the towel and say, well, I'm done with this band. They're going to put out this album with the Extreme Singer. I'm not going to that tour. No, I go to like 4 or 5 dates of that tour because I want to see my band no matter what.
Yeah, and the title of the book is perfectly fitting, The Eruption and the Aftershock. It's the eruption that took place when Van Halen arrived and the shock after hearing the news of Eddie. Do you think Dave's retirement has something to do with Eddie's passing? Did it just take the wind out of his sails? Or is it something that is health related?
People are speculating that there's something health related, and that, they try to dig into what Dave has said here and there, or they just try to dissect what he said in that statement to the Las Vegas Review Journal. And look, if you try to dissect everything that Dave said, I mean, honestly, if Dave has something like, God forbid, if he has some sort of disease, I don't see him throwing together a bunch of shows several months down the line. I do think that maybe he's like, I'd rather go out, not on top necessarily, but I'd rather go out now than be a shadow of myself down the line. I've got to think, and I think I've talked about this in some of my other articles I've done just on music in general, that some of these older artists, what's the worth of going out when you've got something like COVID happening? You know, what do you want to be like? I don't see Paul McCartney planning another tour maybe in the rest of his life. I mean, the guy's 79 years old. Why go out there and risk it? He's super susceptible to something like this. And that might be what Dave's thinking. Then again, he's got so many varied interests. I could see him happy just being a painter. You know, that's what, or an artist. You know, he's been doing that art for so long. And why push it? This is a guy who, you know, the Rolling Stones, they can get up there and do all their old bluesy tinted songs. You start to become a little bit of a joke when you're 70 something years old and you're singing songs like Everybody Wants Some and Panama and things like that. You vocally know that you're struggling, and it's a young man's game, and Dave's kept it together for this many years. I think he wants to bow out gracefully.
Yeah, I hope for sure it isn't anything serious. It does have to be difficult for him to look to his left and not see Eddie there. Michael Christopher is the author of Van Halen, The Eruption, and The Aftershock. It is out now through Backbeat Books. You can get your copy at the Van Halen store, which you can find online at vanhalenstore.com. And Michael, you have a website as well. Where can fans find you online?
You can go to thechroniclesofmc.com.
Cool. Got to check that out. And where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, on Instagram and on Twitter. You can find me at Mick Chrysalis. And on Facebook, you can again find me from the Chronicles of MC page. It's just facebook.com/MichaelChristopher22.
Michael, this was great having you on talking Van Halen, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to Michael Christopher for taking us through his book, Van Halen, The Eruption, and The Aftershock. Be sure to subscribe to Booked on Rock at Spreaker or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can find us online at bookedonrock.com, on Facebook at facebook.com/bookedonrockpodcast, on Twitter at bookedonrock. The email address, thebookedonrockpodcast@gmail.com. You can also contact me through the website. And if you're an author of a book on rock and you want to be on the podcast, just send me an email. I'm Eric Senich. Thanks as always for listening. Join me again next time for another episode of Booked on Rock.